something just changed inside the Trump White House. For the better part of 2 years, Karoline Leavitt has been the person standing at that podium, fielding hostile questions, defending the administration line by line, and doing it all before noon, on live television, with absolutely zero margin for error. And now she's leaving. But here's the part that makes this interesting, and not just another Washington personnel story. She's not walking away from Trump. According to the president himself, she's stepping down from the podium, but sliding into a new role as one of his top outside advisors. So naturally, that raises the obvious question. Why leave now? Because in Washington, timing is rarely just timing. She's leaving right as the 2026 midterms start heating up, right after coming back from maternity leave, right in the middle of a summer that's already been rough for the administration's messaging operation. Now, before we start connecting dots, and trust me, we will connect a few, let's be careful here. Not every departure is a conspiracy. Sometimes people just leave. Sometimes a job that requires you to be combat ready on live television 5 days a week just isn't compatible with raising 2 kids under 3. But sometimes there's more to it. And the honest answer, the one we're going to spend the next half hour digging into, is probably both. So stick around, because this is one of those Washington stories where the official explanation is completely believable and still doesn't answer every question. Let's start with what we actually know, because there's a lot of noise around this story already, and we want to build this on solid ground. On Wednesday, President Trump announced on Truth Social that Karoline Leavitt would be departing her role as White House press secretary at the end of August. He described her as one of his most trusted aides and said the decision was about giving her more time with her 2 young children. A decision he said he completely understood. Leavitt herself confirmed it within minutes, posting her own statement. She called it a bittersweet decision and said that after returning from maternity leave, she realized she couldn't be the mother she wants to be while also carrying the around-the-clock demands of the job. Here's the piece that matters for context. Leavitt gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Viviana, on May 1st. She took about a month off, and when she came back to the briefing room in mid-July, she was stepping right back into one of the most relentless jobs in American politics. Being White House press secretary isn't exactly the kind of job where you check your email at 9 and call it a day. It's live TV, it's confrontation, it's travel, it's being on call basically every waking hour, and that's on a good week. So Trump's explanation lines up with a very human, very relatable reality. New parent, brutal job, tough call. But he also added something else in that same post, something that's going to matter a lot later in this video. He said Leavitt would continue as one of his top outside advisors and an influential voice for Republicans heading into the midterms. Keep that in mind, because it becomes important later. As of the most recent reporting, no successor has been officially named. We'll get into who's being floated, and there are a lot of names, a little later in this video. To understand why this departure is such a big deal, you have to understand who Karoline Leavitt actually is. And it's a genuinely unusual story, even by Washington standards. She didn't take the traditional path. No decades climbing through Republican operative circles, no years of quiet staff work before finally getting a shot at the big chair. Leavitt is only 28 years old, and she became the youngest White House press secretary in American history. Think about that for a second. Most people her age are figuring out their 401k. She was standing behind the most scrutinized podium in the country, going toe-to-toe with veteran reporters who've been covering the White House since before she graduated college. She got her start in New Hampshire Republican politics, worked in the Trump orbit during his time out of office, and became one of his most visible and most trusted communicators heading into the 2024 campaign. By the time Trump won back the White House, Leavitt had already built a reputation as someone who was combative, disciplined, and completely unbothered by hostile questions. And that's exactly the reputation she carried into the podium. She wasn't there to be liked by the press corps. She was there to represent the president's message aggressively, and she made that clear from day one. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Her age and her communication style, sharp, unapologetic, very online, very comfortable on camera, turned her into more than just a spokesperson. She became a genuine media figure in her own right. Younger conservative viewers who'd never watched a press briefing in their life started tuning in specifically for her. That's rare. Most press secretaries are functionaries. Leavitt became a personality, and that's exactly why her departure isn't just a staffing update. It's the loss of one of the administration's most effective messengers, at a moment when message discipline arguably matters more than ever. Let's talk about why the press secretary job actually matters. Because from the outside it can look like a fairly simple gig. Stand at a podium, answer some questions, go home. In reality, it's closer to political verbal combat, with cameras rolling and absolutely no do-overs. Every single word a press secretary says gets clipped, cut, captioned, and blasted across cable news and social media within minutes. A single sentence can become the day's entire political narrative, good or bad. That's an enormous amount of pressure to put on one person, standing alone, with no script that survives contact with actual questions. Leavitt approached the job differently than a lot of her predecessors. She leaned hard into digital media, short clips, viral moments, direct pushback against outlets she considered unfair. She wasn't just managing the press corps in the room. She was managing millions of people watching clips of the press corps online. And that's the thing about the modern press secretary role. It's not really about persuading the reporters in the room anymore. Most of them aren't persuadable, and honestly, that's not really the goal. The real audience is everyone watching the clip later that night. Leavitt understood that instinctively, and conservative media loved her for it. She became a fixture on Fox, a favorite guest across the conservative media ecosystem, and one of the administration's most requested surrogates. Anyone who has watched a White House press briefing knows this is not exactly a relaxing 9-to-5. It's live, unscripted, and often adversarial, and she did it, week after week, for close to 2 years. So when someone with that kind of media weight steps away, it's not a small gap to fill. It's losing one of the sharpest tools in the administration's entire communications operation. Okay, let's get into the actual reason, starting with what she and the president both said publicly, because that's our foundation here. Leavitt has been consistent and specific about this. She said that after coming back from having her daughter, she felt in her heart that she couldn't be the mother her 2 young children deserve, while also carrying the constant demands of the press secretary job. That's a direct, personal explanation, and there's nothing about it that should be dismissed or treated as some kind of cover story by default. This is a real, relatable dilemma that plenty of working parents face, just usually not with news cameras pointed at them. The press secretary job doesn't really have an off switch. There's foreign policy breaking overnight, there's Air Force One travel, there's being available basically whenever the president or his team needs a message shaped and delivered. Layer 2 young kids on top of that, including a newborn, and it's not hard to believe this is exactly what it looks like. But, and here's where Washington starts doing what Washington does best, reading between the lines. The timing naturally raises questions, simply because of when it's happening. Not because anyone has evidence of a hidden reason, but because in politics, people are trained to ask, why now, about literally everything. So let's be really clear about the distinction here, because it's probably the most important one in this entire story. What we know, she stated a personal, family-based reason, and the president backed that account publicly and specifically thanked her for her service. What we don't know, whether there's any additional internal factor at play, friction, strategy shifts, anything else. There is no credible reporting suggesting a hidden falling out. None of the reporting from major outlets covering this story has surfaced anything like that. That doesn't necessarily mean something dramatic is happening beneath the surface. Sometimes the stated reason really is just the reason. And a demanding job colliding with a newborn is about as ordinary an explanation as Washington gets. But the political question of why now, specifically, that's where we're headed next. Leaving the White House is one thing. Leaving just as the political temperature starts rising heading into the midterms is another. We're now in the stretch of the calendar where control of Congress starts to dominate every single news cycle. Republicans are trying to defend their majorities. Democrats are trying to make the case for a change in direction. And the administration's communication strategy, how it frames every policy fight, every controversy, every headline, becomes enormously important. This is usually the moment campaigns want their most effective communicators locked in and fully deployed, not stepping back from a visible platform. So here's where things get interesting. Trump didn't just thank Leavitt and wish her well. In his own announcement, he specifically framed her new role around the midterms, describing her as someone who would remain an influential voice for the party as Republicans work to hold on to Congress. Think about what that actually means strategically. A press secretary is limited by the podium. Every word is filtered through the lens of official White House position. An outside advisor and surrogate has a lot more freedom, more cable hits, more campaign travel, less obligation to stay perfectly neutral or restrained. In other words, this could be read as Leavitt trading a smaller, more constrained platform for a bigger, more flexible one, right when the party needs flexible messengers the most. That's a theory. It's a reasonable one, and it lines up with how Trump described her new role. But it's still a theory, not a confirmed fact, because we don't have direct access to the internal thinking that shaped this decision. There's also a simpler, more mechanical explanation worth mentioning. During Leavitt's maternity leave earlier in the summer, the White House didn't appoint an interim press secretary at all. Instead, it rotated in cabinet officials, the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the Treasury Secretary, even the CMS administrator, to handle briefings. That's unusual. Most administrations treat the press secretary chair as essential and fill it immediately. This one didn't, for weeks. Some observers have pointed to that as an early sign that the traditional daily briefing format itself might be evolving inside this White House, regardless of who's behind the podium. We don't know for certain that's the reason, but it's a pattern worth watching, because it might tell us more about what replaces Leavitt than anything else in this story. What does this mean for Trump? Let's shift and look at this from Trump's side of the table. Leavitt wasn't just competent at the job. She was, by most accounts, one of the most aggressive and effective defenders he's had in either administration. She was combative with the press corps. She pushed back hard on outlets she viewed as biased, and she rarely, if ever, appeared to waver from the administration's messaging, even on his most controversial positions. That kind of loyalty and consistency is valuable to any White House. It's arguably more valuable to this one, given how combative the relationship with parts of the media has been throughout this term. So losing her from the podium is a real loss in terms of day-to-day message discipline. We don't know exactly what Trump is thinking here. Nobody outside his inner circle does. But politically, there are a few obvious possibilities. 1. He genuinely views this as a personal decision he respects, full stop, and he's simply adjusting the team around it. His public statements support that read directly. He called it a decision he understood and respected and praised her work in glowing terms. 2. He sees an opportunity to use her differently, freeing her up as a campaign season surrogate rather than keeping her locked to the podium, which, as we just discussed, comes with real strategic upside heading into the midterms. 3. And this is the more speculative read. Some of this could reflect a broader rethink of how the administration wants to handle daily press engagement at all, especially after weeks of rotating cabinet officials through the briefing room instead of naming a fixed replacement. None of these theories are mutually exclusive, by the way. It's entirely possible all three are true at once. But we want to be honest with you. Beyond what's been said publicly, this is analysis, not inside information. Nobody on this channel was in the room for that conversation, and neither was any reporter who's covered this story so far. Now for the part everyone actually wants to talk about. As of the latest confirmed reporting, there is no official successor. Trump has not announced who will take over. And yes, Washington is already playing the guessing game, because apparently, one empty chair is enough to produce 20 theories. Here's what we do know. Several names are being credibly floated by multiple outlets, though none has been confirmed. Let's go through the most frequently mentioned. Anna Kelly, currently the principal deputy press secretary, is considered by several outlets to be a natural internal pick. She's already been representing the White House on television and radio, especially on foreign policy. Promoting her would offer continuity, the most conventional, low-drama choice. Alina Habba, a longtime Trump-aligned attorney and former advisor to his political operation, has also been named as a leading contender by multiple reports, and reportedly ranks near the top on prediction markets tracking the decision. Scott Jennings, a well-known conservative commentator and veteran GOP operative who spent years defend Trump on cable news, has reportedly emerged as a frontrunner according to some sourcing, though he's been notably evasive when directly asked about it. Matthew Boyle, the Washington bureau chief at Breitbart, has also drawn serious attention according to White House-adjacent sourcing, praised for his aggressive style and deep ties to conservative media. And Harrison Fields, another principal deputy press secretary, has been described as possibly the most conventional internal choice, someone who could step in and maintain continuity in the briefing operation with minimal disruption. A few other names have popped up in various reports too. Jason Miller, Rachel Campos-Duffy, Carrie Lake, Katie Miller, Monica Crowley. But the honest answer is that this list is fluid, it's speculative, and it will probably change multiple times before an actual announcement. One more possibility worth mentioning. It's entirely plausible Trump doesn't name a single permanent replacement at all, and instead continues the rotating official approach we saw during Leavitt's maternity leave. That would be a genuinely unconventional shift for how this White House communicates with the public. Let's zoom out, because this story doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's happening in the middle of one of the most consequential political stretches of Trump's second term. Midterm elections are historically brutal for the party holding the White House. That's just a pattern in American politics, not a prediction about this specific election. We're not here to forecast outcomes, just to explain the stakes. What we can say is that message discipline becomes enormously important in this stretch. Every clip, every soundbite, every viral moment either helps or hurts the party's argument to voters. That's exactly the terrain where someone like Leavitt, young, sharp, comfortable across both traditional cable and social platforms, becomes genuinely useful, potentially even more useful outside the constraints of the podium than inside it. For Republicans, having a well-known, effective communicator freed up to travel, do interviews, and campaign directly could be a real asset heading into November. For Democrats, any turbulence inside the White House communications operation, even turbulence as mundane as a staffing change, is an opportunity to shape a chaos narrative, whether or not that narrative fully holds up. That's just how modern campaigns work. Both sides will try to spin this story in whatever direction helps them. None of that tells us how the midterms will actually go. We're not going to sit here and pretend we can predict an election outcome based on one staffing change. That would be irresponsible and, frankly, a little silly. But it does tell you why this particular departure, at this particular moment, is getting so much more attention than a typical press secretary transition would. What happens next? 30:30, 33:00. So where does this actually go from here? Let's give you a clean roadmap. Leavitt's departure is set for the end of August. So this transition is happening fast, within just a couple of weeks of the announcement. The press secretary position itself is, as of now, unfilled going forward, with no confirmed successor. Based on how the White House handled her maternity leave, it's genuinely possible we see a rotating cast of cabinet officials and aides at the podium for a stretch, rather than an immediate permanent hire. Leavitt herself is expected to continue working closely with Trump and the broader Republican operation as an outside advisor, meaning this almost certainly isn't the last you'll see of her on your screen, just in a different kind of appearance. And the next few weeks matter, because whoever does eventually take that podium, or however the administration decides to handle briefings going forward, will help define how this White House communicates through the single most politically charged stretch of the term so far. We'll obviously be tracking this closely, and if there's a confirmed successor, that's a video on its own. So, is Karoline Leavitt really leaving Trump? Well, yes and no. She's leaving the podium. She's leaving the daily grind of live briefings, hostile questions, and being the public face of every controversy that crosses the White House's desk. But if her advisory role plays out the way both she and Trump have described it, she's not leaving the political operation surrounding the president. If anything, she may end up with a louder, less constrained voice heading into the most important election of the term. And the fact that walking away from the podium might actually mean walking toward more political influence, not less, might be the single most interesting part of this entire story. Washington has a funny way of turning a personnel change into a genuine plot twist. If you enjoy political stories explained without the shouting, without the wild conspiracy theories, and without a 10-minute detour into something completely unrelated, go ahead and subscribe. We break down stories like this every week, and I want to hear from you. Who do you think should replace Karoline Leavitt? Someone with that same aggressive, combative style, or a completely different approach at the podium? Drop your take in the comments. I read every one of them.